Hello, good afternoon. We are group number 2 for the contemporary issue in accounting group assignment. And before we proceed to the video presentation, I would like to introduce our group members. I'm Kai, and I'll be presenting on the introduction and the research objective. Rongui will be presenting on theoretical framework, and Jali will be presenting on research method and expected finding. So now let's get started. So I'll start by giving you a bit of background. So IFRS 6, exploration for and evaluation of mineral resources, was introduced in Australia in December 2004, and it heavily revolves around the recognition and the measurement of exploration and evaluation expenditure, which we will call E&E expenditure from here onwards. So yes, due to the introduction of IFRS 6, a clearer guideline for the recognition of E&E expenditure was provided. However, firms actually still have the freedom to actually choose a number of accounting methods that they want to use when they recognize and measure E&E expenditure, namely the successful efforts method, the full costing method, and the area of interest method. And as you have already predicted, with under all these different accounting methods, it will cause all different mining firms to recognize and measure the E&E expenditures differently, because obviously they will want to pick the method that benefits and maximize their profit the most. And this has created some discrepancy in terms of the accounting methods among the mining firms. Now we'll put that aside and we'll discuss about IFRS 6 first. So even though IFRS 6 has been introduced in Australia since for about 15 years ago, there's actually still companies that were very reluctant and refused to adopt IFRS 6. So our main topic for our report is to find out to understand why there are Australian mining firms that still refuse to adopt IFRS 6. So now we'll proceed to the research objective. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to look into the reason why IFRS 6 are not fully incorporated in the Australian mining firms, and we have 4 key areas that we want to look at. First, we want to look at the firms, the ASX listed Australian mining firms, and find out which has adopted IFRS 6 and which has not. After this step, we'll proceed to the second key point, which is that among the firms that have chosen to adopt IFRS 6, which of the 3 accounting methods have they adopted and why? Next, we will like to examine, under their preferred method, the method that they've picked, how has it impacted their firm's financial statement before and after the adoption of IFRS 6. This will allow us to examine the impact of the adoption of IFRS 6 and find out whether the adoption of IFRS 6 has generated a positive or a negative impact. And then, depending on the answer for this question number 3, we will proceed. Our approach to the question number 4 will be different. If the impact is found to be positive, we will then approach the firms that chose not to adopt IFRS 6 and find out the reason why they chose not to adopt IFRS 6, even with this proven positive impact. And if the impact is negative, then we will just assume that, well, that's probably why the firms chose not to, why these firms chose not to adopt IFRS 6, because the negative is just because the impact is just negative and there's no point adopting it. And this wraps up the research objective part. I will now pass it to Rongui to talk about theoretical framework. Thank you.
The third part is about the framework. In order to reduce the social costs, operating costs, improve accounting skills, and global competitiveness, Australian mining industry started to use IFRS 6 in 2005. The intention is to make it easier for local mining companies to list on foreign stock exchange and no longer limit the inventors from their own countries, and build more accurate and comprehensive standard for financial statement. However, the catch theory and private interest theory obviously shows us that stakeholders will take steps to ensure their interest groups always have been the beneficiaries of maximum profit. Worker-found interest groups are likely to lobby close participation in supervision to respond to the needs of their own, maximize the benefit to their members, or put participations into their interest groups. Therefore, the original standard is more likely to reflect the interests of financial information providers rather than the interests of ordinary financial reporting users. The government makes laws and regulations to protect the public interest, not for its own best interests. Therefore, accounting regulations are required to supervise the activities of entities, but also consider public interest. However, the regulations will affect on distribution of wealth and power due to the social and economic impact of accounting regulation. Accounting regulation is a political process, undoubtedly. But according to the private interest theory, the national legislators and the regulators are also made up of individuals. So they will also tend to favor their own interests or those who fund them. In addition, government intervention also has costs. These interest groups more care about their own interests rather public interest. So the domestic accounting standard no longer making a neutral position objectively. IFRS 6 is an international standardization system. From accounting perspective, it implies every nation applies same accounting standards to bring market to a position of standardization and create harmonization. This would give investors a fair and more transparent investment environment.
So for the research method, we will select companies according to two main conditions. First, we will only looking at the ASX listed mining companies, as their financial report will have to comply with the ASX accounting standard. So we will only pick the companies that have been using one of the three methods mentioned before since they began adopting the IFRS 6. So we will then check the statement of compliance in the company's annual report to filter out companies that did not comply with the IFRS 6. Any report for the fiscal years 2000 to 2019 from the sample will be selected from the company's website and analysis. This will allow us to analyze the impact of IFRS 6 on the industry before and after the adoption. Next, we will examine the accounting methods that each mining firm is using. This can be gathered from the accounting company's any reports. This will then be categorized under the respective accounting methods. A short survey will be conducted to find out the reason behind the decision. It will be a 3 to 5 short question survey with a mix of closed and open questions. This survey will use the Qualtrics and analysis, and it is mainly about what are the thoughts on the method. For example, the convenience in practice, easiness of clarifying data, the time consuming. Then we will determine the sample size of 6 companies. So two main criteria will be used here. First is the company size based on the market capitalization. Secondly, one of each on the upper and the lower market cap will be selected based on the different accounting method. After that, we can analyze on the company's financial statement to compare the firm's performance before and after the adoption for a period of around 20 years. We will then looking into the data of asset and expense to investigate how the E&E expenditure have been recognized and measured under each accounting method. By comparing the data of 5 years before and 5 years after the implementation, we will understand the short-term period impact and the long-term period impact. So we also looking at the data 15 years after the implementation to capture the long-term impact. Then we can conduct two covariance matrices to investigate the relationship between variables such as E&E expenditures, total asset, total expenses, and EBITs, or the share price of the both short-term and long-term impact. This will give us the idea whether the implementation of IFRS 6 generates positive or negative impact. If the impact of IFRS 6 is test positive, then we will conduct a similar survey among the companies that are not applying with IFRS 6 with 5 open questions. And if the impact of IFRS 6 tests negatively, this step will be omitted. So let's discuss our expected findings. We expect to find positive impact generated from the introduction of IFRS 6 on the Australian mining industry. Even though the adoption cost is high, the benefit would surely outweigh the cost. This is true especially in the case of bigger firms, as they would benefit more from having easier access to the foreign market. Furthermore, we estimate the adoption cost to gradually decrease as companies would gradually be more efficient in implementing IFRS 6, which resulting in a long-term benefit higher than the short-term benefit. So by comparing the short-term impact and the long-term impact with the data before implementation, we can understand which items on the balance sheet are affected by the new standard and to what degree. Furthermore, by looking into the 6 firms with different size with the different accounting method, we can see whether the size of the firm would affect the impact and how the impact differ. We can then find the optimal combination that benefits from the implementation the most. So, however, we would not expect the firms to be 100% truthful in answering the survey of the question. So, as mentioned in the theoretic framework, they have incentive to implement policy that only favors their self-interest. Therefore, if it is proven that our finding that adoption of IFRS 6 leads to positive impact, we can verify that the theory of self-interest is correct. So for the implications and the contributions, the findings will be important to the financial statement users like ordinary investors, as they rely heavily on the public information released by companies to make their investment decision. So if we understand how and what degree the accounting method have affected firm's balance sheet numbers, this will give the investors better clarity on a firm's actual financial situation, thus benefiting them in their decision making. Furthermore, if it can be proven that the IFRS 6 generates positive impact on the mining industry, this will encourage firm owners that have not adopted the standard to implement them, so which contributes to the success of harmonization of accounting standards in mining industry. And we also have some limitations. Limited fundings and industry connections make it difficult for us to conduct the research. Furthermore, due to the number of research questions, this research will be quite time consuming because we have huge amount of data to be processed, and this research relies heavily on the response of survey, which doesn't always be attended. This also be a very large questions. So for the future opportunities, comparison between similar sized firms that use different accounting methods can be conducted to analyze the impact of IFRS 6. From the comparison, we can understand how similar sized firms performs under different accounting methods and which method leads to the highest profit. So the further researchers can also study the importance of the introduction of IFRS 6 to the mining industry by making a vertical comparison between other mining industry like oil industry or other global industries such as import and export industry.